The legacy of the Star Wars prequels has been one of the most hotly debated and overly discussed topics on the internet ever since they came out. If you have even a passing interest in movies or nerd culture or anything even somewhat adjacent to Star Wars in any way, you have for sure come across this debate at some point in your life. Now, you might not have been in the comments talking about how they are secret masterpieces or some of the worst things humanity has ever created, but I know anyone who's going to watch this video has all kinds of takes on them, good and bad. They're just one of those things that everyone has an opinion on. It's an impossible debate to avoid if you travel in these kinds of spaces. And as such, the general consensus for these films has really never reached any kind of, well, general consensus. They have the most up and down and back and forth and impossible to pin down legacy that seem to be shifting every which way for years. First, they're terrible and ruin the whole franchise, then they're actually good, then they're still bad, then they're not great but are a goldmine for memes, which is something. Then they aren't just not bad, but actually underrated modern masterpieces that surpass even the original trilogy. Then, The Rise of Skywalker comes out and ends all debate over what is the worst Star Wars film, and the train just keeps on going. The public opinion graph for the prequels looks like the most dangerous roller coaster on the planet. However, in the past few years, it does seem like the debate has finally started to reach its conclusion. Not in the sense that everyone now agrees on them, more just that everything there is to be said about them, good and bad, has pretty much all been said. We all know all the reasons to love and hate these movies, and what side of the fence you land on probably has more to do with your age than anything else. As for me personally though, I think I fall somewhere in the middle on them. I used to watch these movies so much as a kid that it's impossible for me to divorce the nostalgia element from them. I mean, I can't even tell you just how much I used to watch them because it's a lot, okay? I can probably quote along giant chunks of all three of them.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them.
My trick's gonna work on me. Only money.
And they blow you up. Boom!
That being said though, outside of childhood nostalgia and a bit of ironic enjoyment, I really have no love for The Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones. For me, they're simply too dry and too boring and just not as entertaining as a Star Wars film should be. At least to me, they're just flatly not good movies. If you like them, that's great, don't let me ruin your fun, but they aren't for me. At least not anymore. But then we have the one everyone likes and the one that everyone uses to justify their love for this trilogy. Revenge of the Sith, a movie that is 20 years old now. Dear God, that is terrifying. Of all three prequel films, this is the one that has had the longest journey from universally shit on and made fun of to almost universally beloved and even thought of in some circles as the very best Star Wars film, period. Now, I wouldn't go that far personally, as the franchise also features one of the best movies of all time in its roster. I mean, it's pretty hard to top that one, but you know, I get it. If you grew up with these movies like I did, it's hard not to say that this one is your favorite. I mean, come on, just look at this shit. It has a robot with lung cancer and 4 lightsabers. It's awesome. It's also something that I've always wanted to talk about on this platform in some way. I mean, you can't really consider yourself a YouTuber in my particular space until you talk about the Star Wars prequels at some point. These are the rules. Problem is though, until recently, I felt like there wasn't really much for me to say about them that hasn't already been said a million times by thousands of other people. Like I said, people have kind of made up their minds about them and they've pretty much found their place in the culture. It took a while, but after 20 years, we as a society appear to have finished digesting the incredible baggage and all the weirdness that goes with these movies. Oddly enough though, I think that's why now is the perfect time to go back and revisit them. Now that the debate on whether or not they're good has died down now, we can finally for the first time just look at these as normal ass movies, not these titanic cultural pillars that must be defended at all cost or torn down for the sake of the art form. We can put all of that to bed and just approach them the same way we would any other movie, which is a treatment I don't think I've ever seen applied to any of them. Due to the nature of them being in the biggest and most polarizing film franchise in the world, they're always talked about in these extreme ways. ways. People only ever approach them from the perspective of trying to convince you how good or how bad they are. It's like a never-ending political debate where you must believe either one extreme or another. So what I want to do is just look at this movie as unbiased as possible and absent of the usual terms it's talked about under. Just look at it as a regular movie and see how it holds up after all these years. Plus, you know, the whole 20 years later thing sounds good for a video title, so there is that too. Now, before we get into the good stuff, I think it is important to point out that while this is undoubtedly the best of the 3 prequel films, it does suffer from many of the same issues that plagued the previous 2. The script is greatly improved in a lot of ways, especially in the big dramatic moments. In fact, there's actually a lot more great lines in this than I remember there being. Quite a lot, if I'm being honest.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
Where it does still struggle though is in the simple person-to-person dialogue scenes. Those are for the most part still just as flat and emotionless and lacking in chemistry as they are in the other movies. They aren't quite as sleep-inducing as the dialogue in like The Phantom Menace, but those moments still show up here and there and derail a lot of the emotion the movie was building.
You're so beautiful.
It's only because I'm so in love.
No, no, it's because I'm so in love with you.
Likewise, the direction in those scenes only makes the dialogue come off even more hollow when everything is a totally flat, static shot against a green screen background. Yeah, we all know the deal with that. George moving the camera around is pretty much a non-starter. Once that dolly runs out of track, everyone's gotta stand still. None of this is anything new. This is kinda just a deal with the prequels and why oddly they're such a goldmine for memes. Only dialogue written and shot with this level of weirdness can become that culturally significant. So in a roundabout way, it kind of works in the movie's favor. The impressive part of Revenge of the Sith though, and what I've noticed more on my recent rewatches, is how it's able to overcome all of that and actually make those warts kind of irrelevant. You see, the main issue with the prequel dialogue and direction in The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones is that it's always being highlighted. Virtually every scene is riddled with dry, boring, emotionless lines delivered by people sitting down or walking in a 10 by 10 radius. There is almost never a scene where you don't notice it. They might dress it up in a sterile all-white room with long neck people, or in a weird gun submarine, or in a spaceship, or a junk shop, or wherever, but it's essentially the same scene over and over and over again with the same rhythm and same pace. It's why people call those movies boring. It's less of a result of the specific dialogue or even the simple direction, and more the fact that it just keeps repeating the same exact thing the whole film, and it's blindingly obvious. It does not hide its formula well. There's rarely any visual flair or creative camera work or anything to distract you from it. It's like watching a sitcom with no jokes, which sounds miserable, and it is.
A droid army is about to attack the Naboo. We must warn them.
We sound no like the Naboo. The Naboo think they so smarty. They think their brains so big.
Where that isn't the case in those movies is in the action scenes. Whenever you hear someone defend those movies, one of the things they always point to are moments like the lightsaber duels, or the pod race, or the fight in the arena, or the speeder chase, and so on. And the reason why is not just because they're action scenes, that's part of it. I mean, the cool factor plays a huge role, obviously, but the reason why those scenes stand out so much is because that is when Lucas gets out of his chair and starts to actually direct the movie. I mean, he's literally still in his chair, but you know what I mean. There is visible effort and style and speed and energy on display in those moments that makes you give a shit about what is happening. You go from a bunch of unenthused space weirdos yapping about fixing their engine, flirting with kids, and making confusing bets to a drag race with massive stakes, a clear villain, and interesting visuals and sound design, not to mention a great score. It's where all the strengths of Lucas as a director get to shine. The issue though is that in The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, the ratio of awesome moments you want as a Lego set to scenes of people sitting in rooms trading sleep-inducing banter is totally skewed to the people in room scenes. It's just not enough to make up for it. In Revenge of the Sith, however, that simply is not the case, and you notice it immediately. Instead of starting the movie off with 2 dudes in an elevator or 2 dudes sitting down looking bored, this one starts right off the bat with a classic Star Wars action set piece, which is a clear indication indication that they had learned from the mistakes of the previous movies. And I'll tell you what, 20 years later, this shit still looks flawless. I don't know what kind of magic was in the air in the mid-2000s special effects rooms in Hollywood, but this might be the best of all of them. I genuinely cannot think of one issue I have with the visuals in scenes like this. It can be a bit too clean looking in a few of the interiors, but anytime there is a major action set piece, it just looks real in the best way possible. It's just very impressive to have a sequence as large as this, with this many moving parts and colors and things happening, to look this realistic and not feel in the least bit bloated. I mean, just compare this to a CG-heavy Marvel scene 10 years later, and it's a complete joke. You go from a clear, crisp space battle to a cluttered mess of mediocre CGI. Say what you will about George's ability to direct a normal dialogue scene of two humans trying to look normal, and trust me, you can say a whole lot, but there is no denying that he is a strong action director, at least in this setting. The way the camera follows the action in this opening space battle is just great. He gives you such a clear picture of what is happening without jerking the camera around too much or cutting 8,000 times every 10 seconds. It's like watching action figures slam together, and I mean that as a compliment. That's kind of what Star Wars should be. And that skill was also on display in certain moments in the previous two movies, but like I said, it was so sparing that it just couldn't make up for how flat the majority of those movies felt. In this though, Lucas makes the wise choice to just give us more of those action set piece moments, not only in the intro, but across every act of the film. There's about a 30-minute period after the intro where it goes back to the bland prequel Yatfest for a bit, but aside from that, there's always some kind of exciting thing happening. And they aren't mindless, turn your brain off action moments either. Well, I guess the whole Kashyyyk part is pretty stupid, but the rest are good. He now also offloads a lot of the usual expository dialogue in them too, where the previous movies waste so much time having characters talk about the plot while seated or like slowly walking around a small room. This one has the characters talk about all that stuff while also doing the action. Anakin and Obi-Wan tell the audience about the plan to save the Chancellor, not in some bland, lifeless hangar before they take off, but while they're in the middle of a space battle. It just saves so much time and allows the movie to give you more of the moments you want to see in moments it's actually able to execute well. It's dressing up that mediocre script in all the strengths of the movie: the sound, the music, the visuals, and the action.
Get to the command ship, get the Chancellor. I'm running out of tricks here.
So, while it doesn't exactly make the dialogue seem smarter, it does make it so it's not being leaned on to carry the scenes like it was in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. To put it simply, it's just smarter filmmaking and smarter direction by Lucas. And even in the non-action scenes where people are just standing around talking, the film also finds ways of making them feel less stale too. Characters will be bathed in sunlight or shadow. There could be this weird orb concert happening in the background that gives the audience something to look at, and also some neat sound effects. This is not exactly revolutionary filmmaking here, but it does show some level of improvement and awareness from Lucas. You can see him actively trying to make these scenes less stale. It's not totally removed from all the issues of the past, as characters' movement in these scenes is still heavily restricted and predictable, but again, this movie is aware of its weaknesses and attempts to cover them up as best as possible, and that alone is such a far cry from the previous two movies that it feels like such a breath of fresh air. Hell, this movie even has moments when no one is talking at all, and it feels more emotional and more impactful than anyone literally telling us how they feel or yelling no when someone dies. Granted, there is still a bit of that too, of course, but scenes like Order 66 or that scene of Anakin and Padme having their moment across the city are driven solely by the actors and the sound and the music, and it's perfect. You know, like a normal movie. But that would have never happened in the other ones because Lucas was too focused on whatever weird bullshit he was into at the time.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
All of this just makes Revenge of the Sith feel so much more mature and thoughtful, and when you marry that kind of quality filmmaking to the ideas of the prequels, you get some real magic, because if there is one thing the prequels were never lacking in, it was ideas. Now, how to actually execute those ideas, well, that's a whole other story, but again, they sure have some, and perhaps nothing embodies that strength more than this movie's General Grievous, a truly bizarre character, but one that works oh so well. It always annoyed me, even as a kid, that the prequels never gave their secondary villains more than like one movie to exist in. You would watch the movies and desperately want to see more of the guy that has a fucking double-sided lightsaber in Darth Maul, or the more regal, measured Count Dooku that has this special curved dueling lightsaber, but you just never did. They were always underused, and in the case of Maul, barely even given lines. I mean, it would be a stretch to even call him a character in that movie. He's just a video game boss. In this one though, they go all in on this weird-ass cyborg with coughing fits, and it works so well. It's just such a unique character design with the fins on his face that allows him to emote in a way, and how he hunches over and appears to be in some kind of constant pain, and how he uses 4 arms to duel with lightsabers despite not even being force sensitive. He also has this weird bug movement when he needs to escape places, and also, most importantly, he's very, very fun. He's not some dull, emotionless monster who just stands around, or some calm old man. No, he is a total, evil, crazy asshole, and he loves it.
Time to abandon ship.
He's a lot like the Emperor in that way, where he laughs and jumps around and has fun being his insane self. It's exactly the kind of villain this movie needs.
Your lightsabers will make a fine addition to my collection.
Between him and Palpatine being as fun and over the top and crazy as they are, it makes every scene with them so much fun to watch. Ian McDiarmid especially overacts in the best way possible in this, and frankly carries the entire movie. No one has ever loved being evil as much as he does in this movie. The man is an absolute menace.
I have waited a long time for this moment, my little green friend.
They both work as a great counterweight to the movie's otherwise deadly serious tone, which is another thing I think works in this movie's favor. Star Wars is often referred to as a space opera, and no movie in the entire saga leans into that idea more than this one. It is one of the most overly dramatic blockbuster movies ever made, and I mean that in a good way. Unlike past heroes like Qui-Gon Jinn, who couldn't be bothered to visibly give a shit about anything happening around him, the main characters in this movie are straight up going through it. They are crying and yelling and freaking out and are just so full of emotion, you know, like people. Anakin especially feels much better handled in this one, where his emotional conflict is much more relatable and not creepy and psychotic like it was in the last one. You can tell he wants to do the right thing, but is in this constant war with himself between the dark and light sides of his personality. If you want to be less charitable to the movie, you might call that inconsistent, but that inconsistency is, to me, what makes his character actually work in this. He has moments in this of both incredible good and evil. That's kind of just who he is and why he's vulnerable to the influence of someone like the Emperor. He's a very emotionally driven, impressionable person that does not operate well in the bonds of a rigid system like the Jedi Order. He's just not built for that kind of life. And while Hayden Christensen is not exactly the world's greatest actor here, he has some really great moments in this, and overall does a decent job, I think. When he actually gets a chance to play the character subtle, it really works. Gets a bit out of hand a few times, but hey, what are you gonna do? Also, the self-seriousness of this movie I think only gets better with age. In a time where virtually every blockbuster movie is allergic to seriousness and tells a stupid joke every 5 seconds in fear of the audience losing interest, it's beyond refreshing to watch a movie like this that is brave enough to just stand on the merits of its own quality and trust the audience will be invested. It doesn't lean on cheap jokes or references to trends that have the lifespan of a housefly. It's a dramatic, serious movie, and that's all it's trying to be. So in that way, it's a more timeless movie than virtually any blockbuster film made in the past decade, save for maybe like The Batman, but that's pretty much it. Outside of some obvious, unavoidable things like the cast, you can't really date this movie like you can with stuff made these days. It has a very clear, uncompromised vision.
You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you.
Now, I will say, while the high drama plays well off characters like Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme, and the Emperor, it doesn't exactly work well with characters like Yoda or Mace Windu. Yoda kinda works in this at times. He has some cool moments and some good lines here and there, but he's not really a character that's meant for this kind of soap opera, hyper-dramatic tone. He works a lot better in the fantastical part of the series, the part that's meant to give you hope and see the magic of the Force. He's just not built for this, which is fine, and I could excuse if the character of Mace Windu actually worked in this and carried that burden instead. To me, Mace Windu's lack of character is one of the biggest missteps in this movie because you don't need a ton to flesh him out, but you do need to devote some time to him. There are some kernels there with him possibly having this rivalry with Anakin and him just generally being more of a hard ass and a dick than most Jedi, but none of that is really shown to us. Pretty much all he does is just sit around and look bored until it's time for him to whip out his lightsaber and die. But if you were to just go back and cut out the whole Yoda on Kashyyyk subplot that really only exists to get him off Coruscant, and instead devote that time to making Mace Windu a real character with personality and flaws, that would have really made the downfall of the Jedi that much better. Have him overstep his limits, have him be too involved in the war and politics and get away from the true purpose of the Jedi Order. Maybe have him and Yoda butt heads over that. Use him as an avatar to show the flaws of the Jedi during this time period. Make him and Anakin have a real problem with each other. Have Palpatine use that relationship as a primary means of turning Anakin against them. So when this moment finally happens, it means so much more than just, oh no, not Samuel L. Jackson, he had a really cool lightsaber. Bummer. As he exists in the movie though, he's kinda just a complete flatline.
I think Chancellor Palpatine is a Sith Lord.
A Sith Lord?
Sam Jackson has never looked more like a man that has starred in over 150 movies than he has in this, and that is one thing that does carry over in a major way from the other prequel films. Again, to his credit, I think Lucas does an overall much better job directing in this one, if for no other reason than just by him leaning into his strengths and not trying to make characters like Jar Jar work anymore, but there is no getting around the fact that the man simply has no ability to direct actors. It's no accident that a totally CG character like General Grievous emotes more and shows more emotional range than a majority of the human actors, because George doesn't have to direct him. The animators can just do all that in post, and his voice actor doesn't have to be lost on the blue screen hell that is the set of these movies. Now, to the credit of the actors, many of them overcome and deliver some good scenes anyway. Hayden Christensen, like I said, has a few standout moments despite having some lines that I don't think anyone could do well.
You will not take her from me!
Natalie Portman doesn't have a whole lot to work with, but still comes through when she needs to. And of course, we have our boy, Ewan McGregor, who once again carries this movie on his back.
Hello there.
Now, he does have some help from Ian McDiarmid this time around, who again is an absolute maniac in this. That is a man that cannot be hindered by a lack of direction. Obi-Wan, though, is a character that just refuses to be brought down by any of the issues that hurt characters like Mace Windu or Yoda or Qui-Gon. Despite being on the boring, emotionless monk squad, the man just can't help but ooze likability. He just looks like he's having fun making the movie, and that comes through on screen, sometimes to the point where he has to stop himself from laughing when he's telling Natalie Portman her husband just killed a bunch of kids. You know, can't win them all. He's the only character in the movie that brings the plucky, adventurous tone from the original trilogy into his performance, and it goes a long way. In fact, most of the best parts of this movie are scenes that feature him as the main character. The rescue mission on the ship, all the stuff with General Grievous, the battle on Mustafar, hell, even the 30-minute chunk after the intro where the movie loses a lot of its momentum, the scenes with him are all carried by his presence. Also, unlike Attack of the Clones, he and Hayden Christensen have real chemistry on screen, and their characters appear to actually like each other. It's a shame you don't get to see them together more often, but when you do, it really works, and it makes that ending hit that much harder. He's pretty much the heart of the movie. I mean, beyond even this movie, he even somehow makes that boring-ass Obi-Wan spin-off show somewhat worth watching, which is not saying nothing. In short, we don't deserve this man. Nor does this franchise deserve John Williams, but goddamn, he puts in the work in this one. No matter what Star Wars film you watch, you can be rest assured sure that John Williams will clock in and give you his best every single time. It's basically the only consistent thing across all 9 core films. Him and Star Wars is a match made in heaven, and dare I say this movie is where he does his best work. Not only for elevating some otherwise fairly dry scenes with his music, but even aside from that, some of the tracks in this have just no right being as good as they are. Anakin vs. Obi-Wan, Battle of the Heroes, Anakin's betrayal, Padme's ruminations, Anakin's dark deeds, even the fucking scene of Grievous walking out of his ship goes so hard for no reason. It's amazing. It makes the high drama the movie is going for even more dramatic. Still though, despite any of the praises or critiques I can bring up with this movie, the one thing that I think defines it more than anything else is its ability to stand on its own. Yes, it's obviously a finale to a trilogy, but the more I watch this, the more I realize just how irrelevant it makes the previous 2. Like, there are some little bits that carry over, like who Count Dooku is and Anakin and Padme's relationship, but for the most part, this movie just does everything the previous movies did, but better. Again, to the point where you really don't need to watch them to get the most out of this. Anakin in Attack of the Clones is dealing with the dark side of his personality, and he is in this, but it actually works. Obi-Wan and Anakin appear to hate each other in Attack the Clones, but are actually friends here. Anakin and Padme's relationship is awful in Attack the Clones, but it works in this one. None of the secondary villains carry over from the previous films, and Grievous is the best of them regardless. The political stuff with the Chancellor is boring and confusing in the first 2, but it actually makes sense and hits pretty hard in this one. Plus, Palpatine is now an actual character with personality. The side Jedi like Mace Windu and Yoda don't do squat in the other 2, and that's also mostly true in this one, but hey, at the very least, they get to pull out their lightsabers and hop around for a bit. There's no time wasted with Jar Jar or 3PO or R2-D2. It really just has everything the last 2 movies did, but actually good.
Another happy landing.
And I mean all that as less of a dig at Phantom Menace and Attack the Clones, and more just as a praise of how well this movie works as a standalone prequel to the original Star Wars trilogy. You get a very well thought out, decently paced story about the fall of the Republic, the fall of Anakin Skywalker, the rise of the Empire, the friendship of Anakin and Obi-Wan, all in a tight 2-hour runtime, and that's all you need. You don't need any of this other nonsense. Honestly, if it wasn't tied to the other 2 movies back when it came out, I doubt it would have had the rocky legacy that it has, because for all its flaws, it's a good movie and up there with the best this franchise has put out in any medium, not just the mainline movies. But its legacy is so tied to the first 2, and because of that, it took nearly 20 years and a really good animated series helping to prop it up for people to grow to appreciate it. If it just existed as a standalone film or was the starting point for the prequel trilogy, I sincerely doubt there would be much of a debate on its quality at all, which is a shame. It's something no other movie I can think of has ever had to go through, at least not to this degree, and as a result, no one can look at it with a normal lens. It carries such an incredible amount of baggage. Every single bit of it has been picked apart for years or elevated to an almost laughable degree. It will never be left alone. To me though, what this movie is and what it means to me is just a really solid Star Wars film. It captures the joy and the magic of the franchise as well as anything, and even though I found myself on both sides of the endless prequel debate over the years, I think I'm finally at a place where I can just appreciate it for what it is, flaws and all. Star Wars is a franchise that has gone through a whole lot this century, to put it mildly, and now that it appears to be on its last legs with Season 2 of Andor, maybe being the last good bit of Star Wars media we have left to look forward to, I think we owe it to ourselves to just enjoy the good parts of this franchise that we do have. It's not perfect, but it sure as hell deserves a lot better than being caught up in the insanity that is the constant Star Wars discourse. Happy 20 years, Revenge of the Sith. Hope the next 20 is much less eventful.